If you think corporations bought free speech before, now that they're human, they'll buy even more. Yeah, their money has free speech, to me quite a shock.
Hello and welcome to the Alliance for Democracy's The Populist Dialogues. The Alliance for Democracy's mission is in part to establish a just society based on a sustainable and equitable society. I'm your host, David Delk. Our guest today is Julia Degraw. Julia is the Northwest organizer for Food and Water Watch and has been our guest at least a couple of times before. She's joining us today as a representative for the Oregon Right to Know campaign. So thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so talk about the Oregon Right to Know campaign. What is that?
So the Oregon Right to Know campaign is the campaign in Oregon State to make GMO food labeling the law in Oregon. We're going to go to the ballot this November and give Oregonians the chance to vote for the right to know what's in their food and whether or not to know if there's genetically engineered ingredients in their food. And they should be labeled appropriately so people can make decisions about what foods they choose to purchase and feed their families. And the Oregon Right to Know campaign specifically right now is in the middle of the process of gathering signatures to qualify for the ballot this November. So if you see folks on the streets with the blue T-shirts gathering signatures for Oregon Right to Know, that's what it's for, and you should definitely sign.
Right. Okay. Good.
But
yeah.
only once.
Yeah. Only sign once. So, talk about GMOs themselves. What is a GMO?
It's a very good question. It's there's a lot of confusion I've discovered around, for the general populace and knowing exactly what a genetically modified organism is. So a GMO is a plant or an animal that has actually had a gene from a different plant or animal injected directly into its DNA. So an example of this is there's genetically modified salmon that has not yet been approved, but could soon be approved, that has had an eel-like fish gene injected into its DNA, so that it will supposedly grow faster. So we're talking about something that could never possibly have occurred in nature, and that's why the companies that do the genetic engineering, patent these seeds or this life. Basically, they patent the life because they recognize that they're creating something novel that requires humans to create it, which makes it interesting when you're talking about if it's different enough to patent it, then it should certainly be different enough to label.
Okay. Yeah. And so humans have over the millennium taken seed and saved certain seeds because they've liked certain kinds of qualities, and then of course we have made hybrid seeds, and we don't seem to have a problem with that. So how is that process different than making GMOs?
That's a really good question, because a lot of people are confuse hybridization with genetically modified organisms or genetically engineered organisms. And really genuinely the difference is that you're not taking a certain kind of corn plant that has certain characteristics that you like and another corn plant and crossbreeding them to get a hybrid or something that you're looking for. You're actually taking genes from a completely separate plant or animal and injecting that into the DNA of the plant. And that is something that cannot occur in nature. And it's also really interesting, the companies that do the genetic engineering, like companies like Monsanto, are genetically engineering crops, like corn and soy, to be resistant to their chemicals, like their pesticides or their herbicides. And they even have what they call BT corn, which is defined as both a pesticide, because it actually has the pesticide within the food, within the corn stalk itself, and it's also classified as a feed. It's both a pesticide and a feed. That's something that you're never going to get through hybridization. That is not something that can occur in that way. And something else that is interesting is really there's not a lot of independent testing going on here. The FDA, the USDA, no one is really doing independent long-term testing of those crops. They're really taking the industry's word for it when they say these things are safe. We've done our own testing, and that's another reason why we're not saying one way or another as a campaign whether or not GMOs are safe, but it's, given that information, consumers should be able to make a choice for themselves about whether or not they want to be eating, genetically modified ingredients.
Okay, so talk a little bit more about the campaign, specifically what this bill would do.
Yeah, so some people will say that we need genetically modified food labeling or GE food labeling on a national level. Of course, we would love for this to be a national law, but it's really clear that at this point in time, the strength really lies with the states to pass laws requiring the labeling of genetically engineered foods and ingredients. And as that picks up steam across the states, we can eventually get this done across the country. But we're really going to have to build this movement on a state-by-state basis. So here in Oregon, we would be making history by becoming the first state to pass genetically engineered food labeling through a popular vote. And really what it would do is it's very simple. It would just require all the foods that currently have labels on them in the supermarket or the grocery store to have an additional piece of information on there saying whether or not that processed food was made with genetically modified ingredients. And if you're in the produce aisle, same thing, the little sticker that tells you whether your apple's organic or not will also be able to tell you whether or not it's been genetically modified.
Okay, yeah. But you mentioned organic, so there is certification for organic foods, and I believe that organic foods cannot include genetically modified organisms. So don't we already have essentially a label that does this?
Well, and that's an argument that is often made, but the bottom line is this is a food access issue in a lot of ways. Not everyone can afford to buy organic or all organic, and everyone should have the right to choose whether or not they're ingesting something that has been genetically modified. And the organic label may be a guarantee that you're not getting something that's genetically engineered, but that's not an adequate level of assurance. It's not, and it's certainly not accessible to necessarily like the broadest spectrum of people, and that's a very high bar to set to know that you're not eating genetically engineered organisms if you want to be avoiding them. So it's really it's just about transparency. American companies already label genetically engineered ingredients in 64 other countries. So we know how to do it. They're doing it already. They're not they're not losing money by labeling these genetically engineered ingredients in European countries and other countries throughout the world. And at this point, American consumers, frankly, just want the same rights that so many people across the world already have.
Yeah, and we already label foods for many other
for nutrition,
and for amounts of sugar and salt and sodium and
even just calories. You know how many calories are in your food, so you can, like, if you're on a diet, you can count them. It's basic information.
So I would assume that you would say that this process of labeling is not going to end up costing the consumer anymore.
There's a lot of myths that will be floating around out there. We have some very rich and powerful opposition on this campaign. You've got some major businesses, big agribusinesses like Monsanto with really deep pockets that are going to throw a lot of money at this campaign, running ads to basically, frankly, confuse voters, right? And the bottom line is the labeling of genetically engineered foods in other countries didn't cause their price to go up. Manufacturers in this country that are choosing to go GMO free are not necessarily, or choosing to label whether or not they have GMOs in them voluntarily are not necessarily seeing a huge amount of increase. It's just not, they did the math in Washington State, and it does not pan out. There's not a huge increase in the average amount of money that is going to be spent at the supermarket for labeling. Because you think about it, corporations change their labels all the time. I mean, even based on promoting, the latest movie or some, health benefit that, this may help lower cholesterol, things like that. I mean, the companies change labels about once a year. It's not something that really increases the cost.
Yeah, okay. So talk a little bit about what happened in both California and Washington State, because they both had proposals like this.
So yeah, in California, they had a ballot initiative process as well to label genetically engineered foods. There was a lot of things that were different in California and Washington than in Oregon. I think the shortest way of looking at this is, first of all, the movement, to label genetically engineered foods. We're learning as we're learning. We've learned from those two campaigns, and they were very close. They were very close races, and basically what it came down to is the opposition ran some really, really strong and confusing ads and flooded the media market with it, and that was just kind of enough to eke out a win in those two states. And in Washington State, there was a timing issue. It was a really off election. Their turnout was very low, and that makes it very hard to pass any kind of a change. So in Oregon, it's better timing. There's a higher level of awareness with Oregon voters because we did see what happened in California and Washington. There was also recent GMO campaigns in counties across the state that raised the visibility of this. And Oregon voters, I'm going to say it, we're a different breed. We are different in Oregon. Oregon is not Washington or California, and we really do have a pretty independent streak and a strong history of passing initiatives like this. So I think the timing is right, and something else that I think is really key is the thing that wins against big money, which is obviously what's going to be coming to this state, is field. We got to have people out there talking to people, Oregonians talking to Oregonians, knocking on doors, making phone calls. This is how we win. And Oregon has we have a very robust field campaign plan that I think is really going to be the thing that makes this close race a win for us.
Okay, all right, good. So you mentioned about the recent campaigns in a couple of the counties here in Oregon. Can you just describe those? Talk about the campaigns and then what was different about those versus the labeling proposal here.
Oh, for sure. So something that has been brewing in Oregon for a while is several counties were organizing efforts to actually ban GMO crops. The farmers were are threatened by cross-pollination from genetically modified plants that are being grown near them, and that can really affect their business. And they can also get sued for that cross-pollination. It's a very scary thing for these farmers. And so these counties, there was a bunch of farmers and folks organizing to ban GMO crops. And I'm going to give the full story here, which is basically that the opposition did this amazing job of they basically got the legislature to introduce a bill that would stop all localities from passing any rules on agriculture, including GMO bans. And that bill ended up dying in committee, but it ended up being attached to the special session that Governor Kitzhaber held in September. So what ended up happening was that we call it the Monsanto rider. That bill ended up passing through the state legislature, and at that point in time, Jackson County had already been approved for going to the ballot for the GMO ban, and so they were the only county that was going to be allowed to move forward with that in a way that would be recognized by the state. So Jackson County just recently had a huge success and passed a GMO ban. And that is a very different thing than what we're asking for with labeling. With labeling, it's really just about transparency and people being able to know what is in their food. But what's relevant here is that there's just a very high level of passion and awareness on GMO issues in the state of Oregon, which is a really huge step toward getting votes.
Right. Yeah.
And keeping them.
If I were to walk down the aisle in the grocery store and just pull products off the shelf, what products would I find GMOs in?
Generally, if it's a processed food that has any soy or corn ingredients in it, you're likely purchasing a product that has genetically modified organisms. And when you think about all of the ingredients that are based on corn or soy, it's a lot of them. So a very large percentage of processed foods, in the aisles of the grocery store have a certain amount of genetically modified organisms, or ingredients in them. I think something to keep in mind is there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that you have to plant crops every year, and supply and demand is a powerful thing. If whatever consumers demand is what is going to be planted. So I think people sometimes, that's another concern that people will raise, is that there's already so much genetically modified ingredients in the stores already. Is it too late? And it's like, no, companies change how they make food all the time based on what consumers want. So it's like I think that's another concern. That's really what a supply and demand economy operates on: people having access to information and making choices.
Yeah, and I think several major food grocery chains have already said that if the FDA approves this genetically modified salmon, that they will not sell it.
Mm-hmm. People feel very passionately, for very good reasons, about salmon. And I think that's also a threshold that makes people very nervous. It's like, genetically, having eel genes in like a tomato creeps people out, but having, eel genes in a salmon is just a whole nother level of just something that feels wrong to a lot of people, just instinctively wrong. And also salmon are a sacred species to native people, and they're this iconic species to the Northwest, and there's just this, we really love our salmon, and for very good reason. And I think that's the other reason why, at this point in time, labeling is just so important, because there's a lot of other plants and potentially animals that could be coming down the line that are genetically engineered, and we want the label sooner than later so that people can be making educated decisions about what they're purchasing.
Right, yeah. And speaking of more products coming down the line, there is the question about sweet corn, corn on the cob that we buy in stores. Talk about that for a minute.
That was something that, that's one of those, right now in the produce aisle, generally you can be pretty sure that whatever it is you're purchasing has not been genetically modified. But very recently, I think about last year, genetically engineered sweet corn had been approved. So that's one of those really prime examples of, if you're not buying or able to buy organic, sweet corn, you don't know whether or not the corn you're purchasing is genetically modified. And that's right now, the produce aisle is one of the easier places to know that you're not getting genetically modified ingredients, but that's going to change swiftly as these things keep on coming online, which is another reason why the label is so important, so that people can have that knowledge moving forward.
And currently, the FDA is the one that does these approvals?
It's a combination, but the FDA and the USDA are all responsible for enforcement and regulation, and what it comes down to is they're not doing independent testing.
Independent of the GMO
companies.
Manufacturer.
Precisely, yeah. The GMO manufacturers are able to come, to the FDA or the USDA and say, we did, X amount of testing with our own scientists on our own product, and we think it looks good, and the FDA or the USDA says, all right? I mean, that's that's what's And that's the thing, is we're talking about that lack of information doesn't necessarily mean they're unsafe, but it is clearly a lack of information, a lack of independent information.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and there are certainly some people, including myself, who feel like, if it isn't proven safe before you release it into the environment or put it into our food, we shouldn't be doing it until we actually do know that it is safe.
I'm a big fan of the cautionary principle myself.
Principle, yes, right.
And the other thing to keep in mind with that too is a lot of these crops were genetically modified for use of chemicals, and there is really good solid research on the effects of chemicals on the environment and public health. That is another thing to keep in mind. Is it does really contribute to a chemical and industrialized agriculture, which does have some known harm to the environment and public health and to the workers who are out there in the fields being exposed to this stuff. So I mean, I think that's something to keep in mind as well, is that if you're concerned about those issues, genetically engineered crops really feed into those as well.
Okay. Yeah, and that's because Monsanto has been genetically engineering crops to withstand
Roundup. We
Roundup.
have Roundup
Thank
Ready
you.
corn, Roundup
Right.
Ready soy.
Yes, right.
And something that's really interesting too is that the BT corn that they developed, which is supposed to kill like a pest, the pests have grown resistant to the BT corn. Which is evolution. This is basic, science. We understand that that's what, there are always going to be a handful of pests that aren't killed by that chemical, and then they're going to procreate, and then eventually you're going to have a whole host of pests that are no longer affected by that poison. And so you have to develop, and this, for a company trying to make money genetically engineering crops, they'll just genetically engineer a new crop with a new poison in it to kill the new generation of. Basically, it's like an arms race with nature, with no end in sight. So it's like that. That's and that's another reason why it's a very shallow argument when people talk about GE crops are, being developed to feed the world. I mean, the vast majority of GE crops are being developed to enable Monsanto to patent a seed that requires you to buy their chemicals to grow it. That's.
Right. Yes. So they require you to buy their seed, which they have a patent on, and then they require, in order for it to grow, then they require you to buy the chemicals also.
Right.
So it's a
and
big,
then you're not allowed to collect
profit
those
center.
seeds as well. And that's, if you're trying to feed the world, that's like one of the most important aspects of subsistence farmer trying to feed themselves or their family. You need to be able to collect those seeds, and seed collection is absolutely not an option under that model. So it's the GMOs that we know, and the GMOs that are really on the market, the vast majority of them don't appear to be at all feeding that model, or feeding into that model of feeding the world.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're almost to the end of the program,
Yes.
so I want you to talk about how people get involved with this campaign.
Right. I should have been talking about this earlier. We got into the nitty gritty, but here's the bottom line. In order for Oregonians to have the ability to vote on this November, we've got to qualify for the ballot. We have a very short period of time to do that. By July 3rd, we need just over 87,000 valid signatures. So we have a lot of volunteers hitting the streets, and also some paid signature gatherers in order to make sure we hit this goal. But if folks visit OregonRightToKnow.org, they can sign up to get involved at whatever level they're interested, whether it's just making a donation or coming in and helping out on the phones to get people out on the streets volunteering, or going out there and gathering the signatures themselves, talking to their friends and family. There are so many ways that the way we're going to win this is by every Oregonian who cares about this, pitching in and making it happen. And now is the time to start getting involved.
Yeah, good. I will say that I've gathered 80 signatures.
Nice.
And I don't think that I have had anybody say no, that they won't sign it. This is a very popular initiative. The only thing that would prevent this from getting on the ballot would be if people don't go out and gather the signatures and talk to their neighbors and friends.
We just got to do it. We just got to talk to folks and get them to sign. And we have no doubt that we'll hit that goal, but I would like to do it with as many people as possible, because that's also how we're going to win the whole campaign, is by people talking to people. So the sooner you get involved and stay involved through November, the better.
Great.
Better odds are.
Good. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Our guest today has been Julia Degraw, Northwest organizer with Food and Water Watch. We've been talking about the Oregon Right to Know campaign, which is currently gathering signatures here in Oregon on a statewide initiative petition, which would require labeling of foods containing GMOs. Learn more about their effort at their website, OregonRightToKnow.org. We're going to conclude our program today by viewing a public service announcement for Move to Men, co-produced by myself and Jeff Holland.
This nation was conceived as a constitutional democracy.
We want democracy.
This means of, by, and for the people.
Every citizen, not just the fat cats. fairness. We just want fairness.
We don't have that.
Not even close.
Wall Street, big business, the media.
Too much corruption.
Our government belongs to us.
We need government to be honest and transparent.
Elected politicians are supposed to represent us.
Instead, they're stuffing their pockets big time.
Legalized bribery, that's what I call it.
Corporations and the wealthy use their money and influence to shape the world they want, without regulation, without taxation on them, without regard for the consequences of their actions.
Corruption is the illness. There is a cure. It's a constitutional amendment that says this: as a citizen, you have one vote. It does not give you the right to use your money to pervert our political process.
The constitutional amendment must also say this: only flesh and blood human beings are people. Corporations are not people. They are accountable to the people and must earn the people's trust.
A group called Move to Amend has as its single mission the adoption of a new constitutional amendment.
A 28 amendment that says very specifically that money is not speech and corporations are not people.
A 28 amendment, that's what we need.
Whatever your cause, this is a big part of the solution.
It's going to happen.
Join us. Help to amend the Constitution.
If you care about the future, this is how you can make a difference.
We are Move to Amend.
We are Move to Amend.
We are Move to Amend.
We want a better world. This is how we make a difference.
Learn more about the movement to regain our democracy at movetoamend.org. Don't forget you can watch Populist Dialogues on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, search for Populist Dialogues. Click on the result with Statue of Liberty icon to view all our shows, and then click on the subscribe button to receive an email notification each time we upload a new program. The mission of the Alliance for Democracy is to end corporate domination, establish true democracy, and create a just society based on a sustainable, equitable economy. Learn more, visit our national website at thealliancefordemocracy.org or visit our Portland website at afd-pdx.org. We want to thank our volunteers who get us on the air. So thank you to Roger Bates, Joan Horton, Janet Morris, and Tom Thomas. And thanks to all of you for watching. I hope you will watch again in 2 weeks. Bye.
If you think corporations bought free speech before, now that they're human, they'll buy even more. Yeah, their money has free speech, to me quite a shock. 'Cause I never heard my money talk. When a corporation has a colonoscopy, then I'll believe they're human like me.